Toto Wolff calls it genius, and he does not mean it as praise. Behind the Silverstone paddock, Mercedes and Ferrari are locked in a fight over something no one in the grandstands can see: energy, specifically how deep into each lap a car can continue delivering power from its battery. Mercedes holds the advantage, Ferrari does not, and Lewis Hamilton has already admitted that his power drops off on the straights. So when Ferrari brings its response for Hamilton's home race, the reaction from the opposite side of the garage says everything without needing explanation. How does a car that fades on the straights end up being the fastest on a circuit built around long straights and flat-out corners? That is the question hanging over the British Grand Prix this weekend. The answer is not raw horsepower, it is deployment, the duration a car can keep releasing electrical energy down a straight before the battery runs dry. The car that deploys later and more efficiently reaches the next corner ahead without spending anything extra to get there. At Silverstone, where most of the lap is made up of straights and high-speed sections, that fight is not secondary, it defines the entire result. And all the data heading into this weekend suggests Ferrari is on the wrong side of that equation. Start with Hamilton's own words about his car. The Ferrari has the power, it simply runs out too soon, ours tails off, and in just 4 words he captures the entire weakness. Out of a slow corner the Ferrari looks strong, aggressive, competitive, but somewhere in the latter half of the straight the electrical energy drains away and the car falls silent while the cars around it keep accelerating. The final stretch of asphalt before the braking zone is where the lap time disappears, not in the corners, but in the sections where the driver can only stay flat on the throttle and wait for the car to run out of what it has left to give. Now place that car on this track. Silverstone begins with Copse, a right-hander taken nearly flat, the type of corner that rewards a car with surplus energy on exit. Then comes Maggots and Beckett's, a rapid sequence of direction changes that stands as one of the most demanding combinations in the sport, exposing any weakness in a car's ability to carry speed and commitment. After that the track opens up. The Hangar Straight, the Wellington Straight, 2 long full-throttle sections where any deficit in deployment stops being theoretical and becomes visible on the timing screens. Then there is Stowe, another fast corner that demands the car still has something left in reserve. Silverstone offers almost no time to recover, and very little of the lap is spent at low speed. That is what makes this circuit so punishing for a car like Hamilton's. Every corner exit leads directly into another straight, and every straight reveals how much battery energy remains. A shortfall that might cost a tenth at a tighter circuit costs significantly more here because there is simply more distance over which to lose it. The weakness is not hidden at Silverstone, it is amplified. And here is the detail that almost everyone overlooked. The time loss does not appear as one obvious mistake you can point to, it arrives in fragments. A car length lost exiting Copse, another slipping away down the Hangar Straight, another fading on the Wellington Straight, corner after corner, straight after straight until the lap is gone and no one can identify exactly where it was lost, only that it disappeared. So what exactly is Mercedes doing differently? According to reports, Mercedes has developed a method of managing deployment that keeps energy available deeper into the lap than its rivals. A precise pattern of lifting and redeploying that extracts more from the electrical system exactly where it matters on the straights, without sacrificing performance through the corners. The key is timing, not outright output, using the same battery every team has, but using it smarter than anyone else. Picture 2 cars exiting the same corner side by side, both hitting the throttle at the same moment, both reaching similar top speeds, but one continues deploying for just a fraction longer before the battery depletes. Over a single straight that fraction becomes a car length, and over a full Silverstone lap with its long straights and fast sweeps, those lengths accumulate into measurable tenths. At this level, tenths define everything. They decide pole position versus the third row, leading the race versus being trapped in traffic, stuck in the turbulence of another car. This is what Toto Wolff is really smiling about, and why when Ferrari's response appeared in the paddock he chose that loaded word, genius, a compliment that feels more like a warning. It is what one team boss says when he suspects a rival has found something clever and wants everyone else to notice. Mercedes believes its deployment advantage is secure for this weekend. Kimi Antonelli leads the championship by 46 points, and a major reason for that lead is that his Mercedes performs at its absolute best on tracks designed like this one. Take a car that excels on straights and bring it to a circuit dominated by straights and the outcome almost writes itself. This is not a one-weekend advantage that disappears overnight, it has defined the entire Mercedes season. Antonelli does not lead because of a single dominant race, he leads because the car repeatedly finds time in the same areas, race after race on the straights where its deployment holds while others fade. Ferrari has watched this pattern unfold all year without finding a consistent solution. Every team on the grid would adopt that deployment strategy instantly if they could fully understand it, but they cannot, and that is what makes it so frustrating. The advantage is visible on the timing screens for everyone to see, yet no one outside the Mercedes garage can replicate it. Focus on this next point because it explains everything that follows. Mercedes did not expect Ferrari to have a genuine answer, not this weekend and not before the summer break, and from an engineering perspective they had every reason to feel confident given what Ferrari simply cannot change right now. Ferrari cannot fix the engine, not in the middle of the season. The root of the deployment weakness lies deep within. Ferrari's power unit, the one badged ADWA, remains at the center of the problem, and Ferrari's own engine chief has already labeled the issue as relatively minor, a word that quietly carries significant meaning because minor implies there will be no dramatic in-season overhaul and no instant solution arriving in the paddock overnight. The FIA benchmark that evaluates every manufacturer's engine placed Ferrari more than 4% behind the Red Bull unit, a deficit large enough to earn Ferrari 2 upgrade tokens intended to help close the gap, yet the true solution, a redesigned turbocharger, is not present on the car at Silverstone and has instead been delayed until Zandvoort at the earliest, with Monza after the summer break being the more realistic target. Those 2 tokens matter, but only to a certain extent, as they are sufficient to reduce the deficit slightly but nowhere near enough to eliminate it entirely, and using them requires time through wind tunnel work, dyno testing, and final approvals, none of which can realistically be completed within a single race weekend in July. This leaves Ferrari facing a decision it has effectively already made, which is to preserve the full fix for later in the season, protect its development path, and simply manage the races in between, with Silverstone being one of those races to endure rather than dominate on paper. From Mercedes' perspective, the situation is straightforward. Ferrari arrives at Hamilton's home race carrying a weakness that Silverstone punishes more severely than almost any other circuit on the calendar, and there is no immediate way to resolve that weakness through additional power for at least 2 more months. Ferrari cannot outdeploy Mercedes and it cannot outpower Mercedes, meaning that on paper, at this specific track, the outcome of the weekend appears settled before a single lap is even completed, which creates an uncomfortable reality for Ferrari given that the team has just committed its future to this very package. Ferrari has confirmed Hamilton will remain through 2027, with Vasseur making that commitment public, locking in a partnership that had been discussed for over a year, yet the engine expected to carry that partnership forward is the same engine that loses strength at the end of every straight. The driver around whom Ferrari has built its future now finds himself in a car that fades precisely where performance matters most at a track like this, creating a difficult scenario heading into Silverstone where, based on every meaningful specification, Ferrari appears under-equipped for the challenge. The championship standings underline the pressure, with Antonelli holding a 46-point lead at the top while Hamilton sits in 3rd place, still within sight of the battle but far enough behind that a difficult weekend here could have serious consequences, as losing ground at a circuit that favors Mercedes risks pushing the title further out of reach before the calendar reaches tracks that better suit Ferrari's strengths. Securing a strong result at a venue designed to expose this weakness would immediately shift the outlook for the second half of the season, and that is the burden Ferrari carries into Silverstone, not just competing in a race but attempting to prevent an entire season from slipping away. For those who want the deeper engineering narrative behind each race rather than just the highlights, the data surrounding this weekend tells a story that is becoming increasingly complex, because everything outlined so far points toward a single conclusion, that Ferrari has effectively lost this weekend before it begins, yet the next phase is where that conclusion begins to break down. If Ferrari cannot repair the engine, and it cannot in the short term, then the only remaining path to performance lies in optimizing every other aspect of the car, which is exactly where Ferrari has focused its efforts. Without the ability to increase power, the objective shifts from winning the straight-line battle to minimizing losses within it, and this approach is not tied to a single visible component but rather a broader setup philosophy applied across the entire car. Ferrari has trimmed the setup for lower drag, reducing the resistance created by the rear wing to preserve as much speed as possible on the straights where the deployment disadvantage is most damaging, fully aware that this choice introduces a trade-off. Reducing wing levels decreases cornering grip, and Silverstone is defined by high-speed corners that demand stability and confidence, meaning the setup must strike a precise balance, removing enough drag to remain competitive on the Hangar and Wellington straights while retaining sufficient downforce to maintain speed through Copse and the Maggots and Beckett's complex, where lap time can still be gained and where Mercedes cannot rely solely on deployment to pass. This defines Ferrari's entire strategy, to create a car that performs strongest in the sections where battery deployment has less influence while accepting losses in the areas where it cannot compete directly. This approach was never about defeating Mercedes in deployment, as that battle cannot realistically be won before Monza, but instead about constructing a lap that reaches the finish line before the deployment deficit has the opportunity to fully manifest. It is an attempt to guide the car around its own limitation rather than confront it directly, though this strategy carries inherent risk because a low-drag setup sacrifices grip across the rest of the lap. If the balance is not precise, the driver pays the price in the very corners that define Silverstone, with too little wing causing instability through maggots and beckets and giving back any gains made on the straights, while too much wing allows the deployment gap to dominate the long runs, making the lap uncompetitive. Any miscalculation results in a compromised lap that satisfies neither objective, and the margin within which Ferrari must operate is extremely narrow, requiring near perfection because anything less will not be enough to challenge a Mercedes that simply needs to perform at its baseline level. This is the context behind Toto Wolff's remark about genius, not referring to a hidden engine mode or a sudden breakthrough but to a strategic approach that constructs a lap capable of masking a fundamental weakness that cannot yet be corrected. The immediate reaction from the Mercedes garage revealed their understanding of its implications, because if Ferrari could successfully conceal its biggest limitation over a single lap, then the expected outcome of the weekend was no longer certain. That is where theory met reality, during Friday's sprint qualifying at Silverstone, the session where every car runs at maximum performance with no conservation, delivering one flat-out lap with nothing held in reserve, the exact moment when deployment differences. The gap should have been at its most severe, a single lap at maximum attack on the most straight-heavy circuit Ferrari would face all season, and every engineer across the pit lane knew precisely where the difference would show itself, down the Hangar Straight and along the Wellington Straight where a Ferrari with fading battery deployment should have had nowhere left to conceal its weakness. Lewis Hamilton placed that Ferrari on pole with a 1 minute 28.376, the fastest time recorded by anyone, and he did it by just 11 thousandths of a second over Kimi Antonelli, the championship leader driving the car that is supposed to dominate circuits exactly like this one. 11 thousandths, less than the time it takes to blink. The leader of the championship, holding the deployment advantage in the machine built for this type of layout, was beaten to sprint pole at his rival's home race by a Ferrari that the entire paddock believed should not have been close to the front. Consider what that lap truly represents. It was not a sudden discovery of missing power, because the fade is still present and the engine remained unchanged overnight. What changed was Ferrari constructing a lap where that fade mattered as little as possible, combined with a driver who has mastered this circuit performing in front of his home crowd. Hamilton did not defeat Mercedes through superior deployment. He made the deployment deficit irrelevant for one flawless lap in front of the fans who came to see him deliver exactly that. The choice to trim the car and prioritize corner performance may have seemed minor when it was made, but it was in fact decisive, shaping the timing screen on Friday evening. Had Ferrari accepted its disadvantage on the straights, this outcome would never have occurred, but instead it identified a route to the front that avoided reliance on the engine altogether. The plan succeeded once under the exact conditions it was designed for, but the question is whether it could endure beyond that moment, because a sprint pole is decided in one lap while a Grand Prix unfolds over many. By Saturday, the picture began to change as the sprint race forced cars into close running, giving the deployment difference time to reappear over multiple laps rather than a single effort. Antonelli and Mercedes secured the win, and in qualifying for the main Grand Prix he improved further, taking pole for Sunday with a 1 minute 28.111, faster than Hamilton's earlier benchmark and faster than anyone else. The expected order returned as soon as the circuit demanded consistency instead of one exceptional lap, requiring Ferrari to sustain performance over repeated runs. That defines the true situation. Ferrari's approach is genuine and effective within a narrow window, one lap, low fuel, maximum commitment, where setup and driver precision can conceal a fundamental weakness. Extend that scenario into a full race, where the battery cycles repeatedly and the long straights appear again and again, and the gap that Ferrari cannot resolve until later in the season gradually re-emerges. The real question for Sunday is not whether Ferrari found something clever, because it clearly did, even Wolff acknowledged it in his own guarded way, but whether that ingenuity can survive an entire race against a car that consistently deploys energy longer down every straight. Hamilton begins near the front at his home race, driving a car engineered to perform beyond its limitations, chasing a championship leader whose primary advantage remains the exact factor Ferrari cannot overcome before Monza. Sitting 46 points behind in third place, supported by a home crowd that has backed him at this circuit for years, Hamilton has every reason to push to the absolute limit. The British Grand Prix takes place on Sunday. Antonelli starts on pole, while Hamilton carries the support, the setup, and a strategy that has already achieved the unexpected once this weekend. Whether it can deliver again across a full race distance, with the straights testing him lap after lap, is what makes this contest impossible to call and entirely worth watching, because this race is not decided, not even close.